Hey everyone, I'm just going to give it a couple of minutes as more people are coming in, and then we'll get started. If anyone joins like later, I'll just admit them as fast as I can, because I know it'll come up on your screen when you're presenting as well, like off with you.
Amazing. Okay.
I think most people are like coming in now though. If you just join, I'm just waiting a couple of minutes just to let everyone come in, and then we'll get started. Good, I think that's slowed down a little bit now. So welcome back to another Female Athlete Monthly meeting hosted by the Women in Sport and Exercise Academic Network and the Period of the Period. And this is our first meeting back sort of this academic year. So it's nice to see lots of old faces back and lots of new ones joining as well. So thank you so much for showing your support here as well. And hopefully I've got the Facebook live stream working. So fingers crossed. I was going to say we've had lots of issues, but it's definitely my fault in the past. So hopefully that's all working well on there. And one thing to note as well from previous meetings is I know on Facebook we can't see your questions. So if you just have any questions, submit them on there, and then I'll keep a lookout on them as well as we go through for the Q&A at the end. So if you're a Female Athlete Monthly Meet regular, like some of you are, you probably already know how these webinars work. But if you're new here, then these meetings run every month, and each month we have a new guest presenter or sometimes presenters sharing some of their research or experience working in this area. And we try to cover a broad range of topics all related to female specific considerations in sport and exercise. So from the menstrual cycle all the way through to menopause and lots more as well. And basically how it works is I'll briefly introduce you to tonight's speaker, so Emma, in a moment, and then I'll hand you over to her for her talk, and then we'll finish with the Q&A at the end as well. And I'll just ask everyone to remain on mute during the talk, and then pop any questions as we go along in that chat, and then I'll monitor them as we go for the Q&A at the end. Or alternatively, if anyone's feeling a bit more brave, you can unmute yourselves, come on and chat as well. So try to keep these meetings as relaxed as possible, so just a space to share ideas, thoughts, knowledge, connect, etc. So do get involved. And just before we get going, if you're listening and would like to present some of your research in the future at one of these meetings, then please do get in touch. Or alternatively, if you have a topic or a speaker that you would love to be covered or on, then do get in contact and let us know too, and we'll try to arrange that also. So this evening, we're very lucky to be joined by Emma Cowley, and Emma is a final year PhD student at Liverpool John Moores University, and her research focuses on the development of a holistic exercise program for teenage girls, so the Horizon Project. And Emma is passionate about equal access to healthcare and sport for women and girls, and she hopes that her work can contribute to the closing of the gender data gap within this field. And linked to that, tonight she's going to be presenting on one of her latest papers, Invisible Sportswomen, the Sex Data Gap in Sport and Exercise Science Research. And I know Emma myself because she was one of my participants in one of my most recent studies, and she's absolutely incredible. And I was lucky enough to be invited onto this paper by her and play a very small role in it. So yeah, without any further ado, I'll hand you over to Emma now.
Thank you so much for having me. That was such a lovely introduction. Thanks, Kelly. I'll go ahead. I'll share my screen now. Okay, can everybody see that okay? Yeah. Perfect. Okay. So thank you so much for having me. As Kelly said, I'm going to talk about our recent paper, Invisible Sportswomen, but I thought maybe I'd give a bit of a background to myself and kind of how this paper came to be. So to kick off, I was a PE and biology student. That was for my undergrad over in DCU in Dublin. And you can see it was a very serious degree. No, I'm joking. It was actually a really, really difficult degree, but it was really enjoyable. And during my time doing PE teaching, it was quite noticeable, like in the PE classes, that a lot of girls weren't participating in physical activity. And so with that in mind, I decided I wanted to kind of go and research that a little bit more and do a master's. And so I went over to Glasgow. And if you haven't been to the university in Glasgow, I 100% recommend a visit if you want to feel like you're in Hogwarts. So I did my master's over there in sport and exercise science and medicine. And my research really focused around public health and more so than kind of working with elite athletes or anything like that. And so I was on the lookout for a PhD, but I kind of knew that what area I wanted to do it in, and nothing had come up around that time. And so I took a job over in London, and I was trying to find a photo that kind of illustrated my time in London, and all I could really find was lots and lots of pictures of airports, because I worked for a funding, kind of a European funding provider there, and it was just an awful lot of travel. And so I knew I didn't want to do that long term. And just right around the time I was getting pretty burnt out at that, and a PhD opportunity came up in Liverpool. And there, as Kelly mentioned, my research really focuses around physical activity in teenage girls, and really understanding what are the facilitators and barriers that prevent girls from continuing and dropping out of sports. And to be honest, I think a lot of the reasons probably apply to all of us, regardless of, you know, whether we're adolescents or adults. That kind of fear of being judged by other people, and people looking at our bodies and our abilities. And so that's what my research focuses on in terms of my PhD. But obviously when I'm doing that research, I obviously look at a lot of literature around adolescent girls. And although there's a decent amount, there probably needs to be a bit more. And I think that kind of fed into the idea of the Invisible Sportswomen paper, and that's what we're here to talk about this evening. So when I kind of recognized that there was a bit of a gap in this area. I went and had a look, and there had been a review done in 2014, and it was great. And it highlighted that there was a data gap back in 2014. And I thought, that has to have narrowed by now. You know, 6 years later, surely, like, you know, this has been, that gap has been reduced. So I thought maybe we could follow a similar methodology and do like an updated review. And so that's what we did. And I'm going to talk through that this evening. So I just thought I'd give a quick overview of the presentation this evening. So I'll talk for probably about 20 or 30 minutes, talk about why does this gender data gap even matter, talk through our updated review and the findings, some potential contributors to this gap, and then what we might do looking forward to reduce it. So why does the gap matter? So I think, you know, recently, and hopefully everyone, you know, will be able to see this in their own sporting environments, but I think there's definitely a rise of women participating in physical activity, whether that's at, you know, the community level or right up to elite sports. You know, in Tokyo 2020, we had almost 50-50 male and females, which is obviously fantastic. We also have an increase in the number of women presenting at sporting events. So in the Euros 2021, there was 7 out of 31 pundits were women. In comparison to 2016, there was only 2. We also, here in England, you know, there's almost 65,000 females signed up at at boxing clubs. So that's great. And I think that's really great to even see kind of women fighting against that, you know, stereotype of women in combat sports. We have an increase in sponsorship. So the most recent statistic I could find was between 2013 and 2017, but maybe that percentage is higher now. So we had an increase of 47% in those years. Projected revenue for women's sports of 2030 is £1 billion, which is fantastic. And then likewise, all the way down, if we're looking at elite sports, right back to secondary school, we have over 1,000% increase in participation since changes like Title IX in the States and other kind of policy level policies that are in place now, kind of promoting and encouraging equal access to school sports for teenagers. And then when we look at, we keep in mind why this gender data gap is important. I think men are often used as proxies for women. So, if something works or doesn't work in men, we kind of apply that to women and think that it's the same because we're just small men. But we know now that that's not the case. So women suffer differences in terms of ACL tears, ankle sprains, stress fractures. Our energy metabolism is different, thermoregulation, exercise capacity, muscular strength and hypertrophy, and sleeping patterns and cognition. And I think with this, we might have big differences, there might be small differences, there might be no differences. But in a lot of these situations, we don't actually have enough evidence to really have a clear conclusion on that. And that's why we need more data. Also, if we think about, not just looking at elite athletes, my research focuses really just on women's health, on, you don't have to be even playing sports at any sort of level, but just your general, I think sometimes when we think of sports science, we think really of just these like team sports or high ranking, athletes, but actually, it affects everybody. It's just general movement of health. So we know that breast movement, poor fitting sports bras can decrease your stride length by 4 centimeters. And if you rack that up, over a marathon, that's an extra 1.5 kilometers just for having a poor fitting sports bra. If we look at the menstrual cycle, do we need to adapt our training? If we do, how do we adapt it? If, do we even need to, I think is a question. And again, we just need more research there. Pelvic floor, and I always think of Emma Ross from The Well. So she talks about, pelvic floor, and if we have leaking, and that's not just from, older adults, it's all women across the lifespan can suffer from pelvic floor or a weak pelvic floor. And so if you're leaking fluid when you're jumping, it's kind of not talked about, but Emma talks about, well, it wouldn't be normal if there was fluid coming out of your ear. So to normalize these things, and also, talk about how we can help women that is happening too. And also we need more research for coaches, researchers, teacher education, so that we can better serve all women across the lifespan. And this is something that kind of, I think I find quite important in terms of this research when we look at actually why do we do a scientific experiment. So a scientific experiment is a scientific test that's done in order to discover what happens to something in particular conditions. And I think what illustrates this point for me is that sometimes women's research or research conducted with women isn't seen as novel or isn't seen as important because it's already been done in men. So, we don't need to do it again in women. But, and I think that there's other, academics on the call tonight, and I'm sure of particular research projects that have been funded, and you think, how did that get funded? And, this really important thing didn't get funded, or this grant got rejected. And I just have some recent ones that I found. So this study was published in 2015, so not that long ago. And it basically concluded that electric fans are effective cooling devices when there's no air conditioning, which, isn't a revelation. I think that's pretty, that's fine. And then likewise in 2015, this grant had almost $700,000 of funding, and it was looking at the importance of studying shrimp on a treadmill. I'm unsure of how generalizable or scalable that is to the wider population. This is going back a little bit further in 2019 that concluded that wearing wet underwear is probably going to make you cold. And finally, this paper in 2016 found that if you walk backwards or hold a coffee cup in a claw hand posture, it will reduce the likelihood of you spilling your coffee. And I just think, like, if these can get funded, why is it that we need such justifications of including women? But I'll come back to that a little bit later on. And finally, then, like when we're looking at why it's important to reduce this gender gap, publishing female research. So, and when I have less impact here, I don't mean in terms of the actual research, but research conducted on women or by women are usually in lower impact journals. And women also have a lower chance of securing prestigious authorship, so corresponding author or first author. Likewise, for female PIs, on average, they're receiving $40,000 less in grant funding compared to their male peers. We need to usually, you know, I've had it as well, like where we'll get reviewer comments and they'll ask for, well, why are you looking at girls in particular? And I think that a lot of research that's conducted on females, really, you need to justify why it's being conducted on females, and maybe that's unfair in light of those other studies that I've presented there. And the dreaded reviewer too. So this study found that white women were twice as likely to question their scientific aptitude was questioned twice as much in comparison to white males. So with all that being said, I'm just going to briefly present then on the updated review and what we found. So we looked at papers between 2014 and 2020, and we collected these journals from 6 sport and exercise science journals. So 3 of them were included in the original Costello 2014 paper, and a further 3 were collected based on perceived popularity and impact factor. There was just over 10,000 articles identified, and then we got excluded any reviews and non-living human studies, so things like, or papers that included cell cultures, animals, cadavers, and we were left with just over 5,000 papers. So when we look at the results, we're talking here about sex disparity in publications. So 63% of papers included both sexes. 31% include only males, and only 6% include female-only papers, so exclusively females. And the difference between male and female only was significant. So then when we look, so now we're looking at the actual absolute number of participants involved. We had just over, or 12.5 million participants in total across those studies. Just over 8 million were male, and just over 4,000 were female. And again, there was a significant difference between male and female participants. So I think what's really interesting for me is the sex disparity within publication title. So what this means is that if you only include female, do you have female in the title? Do you have girl, woman, so on in the title? So what we found was that a lot of papers that only included males had human in the title. So 14% of papers that only included male note that in the title, whereas 328 papers that only include female, 63% note that in the title. And again, there's a significant difference in that. And lastly, so these are results on the disparity in sex-specific health topics. So what this pie chart illustrates is that, so the kind of the lighter pink is all the articles that only included women. And just over 16% of those articles were looking at a female-specific health topic. So those topics included the menstrual cycle, hormone contraceptive use, pregnancy, and breast cancer. And in comparison to males, so again, the lighter blue is all the male-only articles, 0.4% were looking at male-specific health topics. And they were looking at prostate cancer and semen quality. And again, there was a significant difference between these two. So I just wanted to briefly talk about some of the contributors to this gap. So these are some factors that you know, we think might be contributing to this gap. It's not data that we have collected, so further, you know, investigation needs to be done to see if these are associated. But I think the first might be around the fear of sophistication of the methods used to include females. I'm not saying that males are easier to study well. I mean, I guess they are, but I think that might turn off some researchers for including females. You know, maybe they need to have they need to include blood measures, and maybe that's not something that they're familiar with, or whatever the case may be. It may just be that initial fear. But there's lots of papers now that have methodological recommendations for how to include women or how to control for the menstrual cycle within sport and exercise science research. And I don't think it's as simple as just saying, let's include women. I'm not, you know, naive enough to think that. I know that we do have an increased time and cost of including females in some situations. For example, if you're looking at maybe 4 different training protocols, in a man, you might get him to come in once every week for a month. In a woman, that might be once every 5 weeks. So, you know, multiply, you know, it's 20 weeks. So I appreciate that it is a little bit more difficult. And also in terms of cost, we all have budgets that we have to abide by. And, you know, if you're looking at blood sampling, that budget dwindles very rapidly. So yeah, I think that there is some practical and pragmatic issues around including females in certain studies. And also then talking around kind of the variability in cycle length. So contrary to popular belief, women don't have a perfect 4-week cycle. And if you're trying to run a study and, you know, everyone's trying to start at a certain time, or you have a 12-week group program, that's difficult. And also, you know, if you're working to a PhD timeline or a grant or whatever it might be, you know, these are all variables that make it that much more difficult and probably longer. And lastly, is there bias? You know, I don't know. So when we look at actually, you know, we've done the research now, and actually getting that research to be published out into that wider world, is there a barrier at that level? And so these bar charts just illustrate looking at the differences between males and females in terms of at the senior editor level, reviewing editor, peer reviewers. And we know that there's some data there available that looking at, you know, females are more likely to study females, males are more likely to study males. So is it because there are more males in these senior roles, or in, you know, are there more men in academic roles in sports science, and therefore they're just naturally going to be studying males more? I don't know. I do know though, in the 6 papers that or in the 6 journals that we included, there was only one editor-in-chief of those 6 journals, or one woman editor-in-chief, yeah, in those 6 journals. So I'm not sure, maybe that could be another contributing factor. So looking forward then, these are some practical suggestions that may help to close this gender gap. So I think transparent reporting is really important. And what I mean by this is looking at publication titles and abstracts. So it's great for us who have access to journals and databases. We can go in, we can look through the full methodology, we can really see who is recruited, look at their demographics, look at all of that. But is the purpose, you know, of some of these papers to actually help coaches, to help teachers, to help, you know, the general public who don't have access to the full text? And therefore having human in the title of a paper that only included males or only included females is really not helpful. That information may be able to be applied directly to, so if it's only included boys, maybe it can be directly applied to girls, but we don't know that. And so I think that we need to be really transparent and honest in our reporting within titles and abstracts. For example, as Kelly has so beautifully demonstrated here, you know, it's a simple change that can be made, that I think, yeah, would just really hopefully improve. Oh, sorry, I see that there's perfect. And also then in terms of inclusion and exclusion, so we know that we see a lot of the time that women included in sports science, it's difficult. Hormones complicate everything. It's too variable, too expensive. We just use men as a proxy. They might be true, but I'm not sure if they're a good enough reason to exclude females. So I know in this study by Shields in 2013, 95% of stage 4 trials exclude pregnant women. Now, I don't know, maybe we have research at certain times that we can justify the exclusion of pregnant women or women at any stage of their life. But I don't think it's a good enough reason to just exclude a woman without having a solid justification and reference to back that up. Because in this instance, we know that 3 out of 5 pregnant women are taking multiple medications. But I'd love to know how many of those medications were trialed in pregnant women. And also then if we look at 47% of cardiovascular trials are excluding fertile or pregnant women. And again, maybe it's not safe, but we just don't know. And so I think we need to have better justifications for our inclusion and exclusion criteria. Grants and funding. So I think because the gap is so big right now, we probably do need more investment specifically for women and increasing women's participation in sport and exercise, and also within research. But we can see that recently there has been a drive and a push to really hopefully improve the research and health of women. I think sex disaggregated data is also really important. So in around 30% of studies, covariates, to publish covariate adjustment or subgroup analysis by sex is done. But only around 7% include sex-specific reporting of results. And I think this is a really nice example. So if you just look here at the third row, so we have the average annual income. So if this wasn't disaggregated, the average annual income is around 7 grand, which totally kind of hides the actual big gap between men and women's income in this example. So 10 grand to 3 grand. So although sample sizes may not always be big enough to actually disaggregate that, maybe we can attach it as appendix, supplementary material, but just some way that we can actually differentiate the results for men and women and not just compile them all together. And lastly, I just wanted to touch on female volunteers. So we saw that over 60% of the data or of the publications were offered to men and women. So they were inviting men and women participants, but we still have this massive difference in terms of the actual number of participants in comparison to male and female. So around 60 to 40%. So is that because we need different recruitment strategies? So this is a big billboard, and I don't know about you guys, but feeling fat and lazy with a question mark wouldn't really entice me to sign up to a study or a gym program or whatever it might be. So do we need different recruitment strategies for women? Do we need to recruit in different locations? I don't know. Likewise, do women avoid trials because of pain and discomfort more than men? So this is just a photo of like a pre-muscle biopsy. So I have no idea, like, you know, it is painful. You're also probably going to be left with a little scar. Does that put women off? Is there something that we can do in terms of enticing them to sign up to a study? So different methods. Would it be more convenient if we offered some sort of childcare in the labs? And I think the only way we're really going to know that is if we actually talk to the public and potential participants. So talking to teenage girls, talking to mums, talking to whoever it might be, to find out what is the barriers that they feel is preventing them from signing up to things and what might help. So yeah, that's about all from me. I just wanted to say a massive thank you to my co-authors, Kelly and Alyssa and Emma, for writing this paper with me, and obviously to the Women in Sport and Exercise Network for having me on, and also to my dear friend Janina over in Germany, because it was really her idea that kind of pushed me to write this paper. So big thanks to her. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Emma. That was great. And yeah, thank you for inviting me to be on the paper as well. And yeah, we've had a few questions coming in on Facebook, so I've been writing them down just so I could keep a note of them. So the first one was, do you think that studies in sport and exercise are advertised for men? And I know you kind of touched on it a little bit more in terms of recruitment strategies there, but what do you think can change in terms of how we kind of present those adverts to sort of involve females as well?
Oh, I think that's such an interesting question. Like, I know from my research with teenage girls, so we've tried to, within Horizon, like talk to the girls all the way through to kind of, so initially when we were designing Horizon, we had, I should say my target audience is 13 to 16 year olds. And we had muscle biopsies and blood samples. And I was kind of thinking, that probably isn't going to work with them. So we went and did some focus groups, and with them, we actually asked them, you know, where would you like to see posters for this? How would you sign up? And they talked about having things like really colorful posters. They talked about how they use Instagram the most. That was the platform that they would see these ads. They didn't really want to see anything in school because a lot of them had quite negative associations with PE, unfortunately. So they wanted something separate. So I think it's probably really different depending on who the target is. And I think talking to them is probably, yeah, most important.
Yeah, no, 100%. I know you touched on it there. I just noticed it came in before you started talking about recruitment. There was also another one that says, what would you say to a researcher who doesn't really know where to start or might feel sort of overwhelmed by everything?
I feel like, Kelly, you may be best suited to this. Do you reckon, yeah, one of your systematic reviews?
Yeah, no, yeah, definitely. And I think if you kind of sat thinking like, how do I include females in research, then it is a bit daunting, especially when, say, the reviews, for instance, we harked a lot on about high quality and raising that quality. And if you kind of set out, you might be thinking there's a lot of steps before I can even start to sort of begin to research females, and it can be daunting. But I guess it's just start somewhere, you know, like we need that research. Any data is good. And I think often sort of female research has almost become an elitist area in terms of like you feel like you have to get everything right before you can have it sort of accepted. And it is important that we do get that higher quality research as well. But equally, you can see from the study that we need data and we need females involved in sports science research. So I guess just to start and then educate yourself as you kind of go through that and just do the best you can with what you've got available, I guess, is what I would kind of say.
And I think, because I think it's the same with anything, isn't it? It's like your timing and your budget is always going to, like, we all have goal standards in terms of whatever it is data that we're collecting, but you may not have access to the best VO2 max, or you may, you know, and yeah, I think, as you said, like, doing what you can is the best thing. You know, it doesn't have to be you know, blood samples or whatever. If you it's better, I think, to include something than nothing.
Yeah, I think definitely agreed there. And then there's another one. So females volunteering, again, kind of what you touched on. How can we make studies more female friendly? And I think this is in terms of sort of thinking about most females or sort of the caregivers. So whether that's being a mother or looking after someone else. And there's a lot going on just from they can just have free time just to participate in a research study. So I know that's a complex question to answer that, but yeah.
I think, you know, I think it's so important, and it is those practical, or it may be those practical things that are preventing. Like, it may just be that, you know, there's not free parking, or you're not getting your public transport to the lab paid for, or, you know, you don't have childcare. And if those are small things that we as the researchers can facilitate for and accommodate, you know, that would be an easy fix. So I think, yeah, maybe it is those practical things, but also actually like the ease of signing up for things also, like making it, you know, if you're doing, I don't know, like if it's a study that it is a survey, that they can do it on their phones if they're out and they're busy, and likewise, you know, webinars or whatever it might be, that it's at convenient times. Yeah.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And then just looking in the chat here, we've got one from Becky saying, do we know what it is that prevents studies involving female participants or focusing on women being published in those higher quality journals?
Oh God. I don't know. And I don't know, because I think it's I don't know how you conduct research to find that out, because I think there is probably bias going on there. You know, there are males in, not all males, but, and maybe women, but in higher ranking academic positions, or like in gatekeeper positions, that, you know, for example, like resistance training, we have heaps and heaps of research on that, but the majority of that is done on males. A lot of our guidelines are developed based on studies that have only involved males. And so, you know, if we went to submit an article to a high impact journal that only included females, there's a high chance that that's not going to be perceived as novel. But it is novel because it hasn't been conducted in, you know, over 50% of the population. And we don't know if, you know, the traditional rep ranges of whatever 8 to 12 are effective for hypertrophy in women. They probably are, but we don't have the research. That's just an example to back that up. And so I think that's probably a factor that's preventing, you know, but I think that is changing. I don't know if you think that too, Kelly, but I think that there is definitely a push in the last year for female specific research. I hope it's just not a trend.
Yeah, no, and I think you're right in that as well. Sorry, I'm just reading that reply. Interesting, thanks for answering. Mirrors my own experience. You only have to look for books on strength training for by women to learn that there's very little out there. There's another question as well. It says, were there specific areas in the research highlighted that where we need sort of more female specific research? Sorry, I made a total mess of that question.
No,
were there specific areas in sports science highlighted that we need more female research? There we go, that was bad.
I mean, I think it is everything across the board. I don't know. Like, I mean, yeah, it's like injuries, like kind of all those areas that I touched on. And although I think that there is an increase in ACM, like concussions recently. But yeah, I would say, can you think of anything specifically?
Yeah, no, I think that was what was the interesting point in the paper was when it came back, I think out of, do you know, the female only research where only very small percentage of that 16% was actually looking at female specific stuff. And I think that surprised me the most in terms of that it was all quite general in terms of they weren't really looking at, say, menstrual cycle, hormonal contraception, pregnancy, breast health, pelvic floors, etc., menopause. It was just generally looking at things that could be applied to both men and women. I think that's what kind of, when we were doing it, I was like, oh, that was quite surprised by how small that number was. So yeah, maybe it's more on sort of everything in terms of those female specific areas as well. There's another one that's just come in there saying, as a university lecturer, what role should I play when teaching on sports science degrees? And I think this one's quite interesting because I know, like, during my time at university, I know I was always encouraged to use male participants, say my dissertation, and then give the reason of why I did that. But I don't actually really know why I was told that. But yeah, no, it's quite an interesting point.
Yeah. I know from my experience, and someone actually got in touch after we had the paper published who had a similar experience to myself, that we were given a data set, you know, in one of our labs, and it was all male participants. So I think, like, you know, if you're giving, as in if you even don't have to collect, so if the time and the money and all those factors are actually taken out of it and you're given a data set, I mean, that's a good, I mean, you could have males and females, I guess, included in that. But also, I think, I know you've said in their sports science degrees, but I think almost linking that back to your point, if you are a supervisor, I had an interesting conversation there recently about, so, and I guess Kelly, like you might, so in terms of PhDs, when we do, yeah, like design our studies. So I was thinking, you know, if traditionally you do 3 research studies in a PhD, we'll just say, but if you're including women, that's really quite difficult because it does take typically longer to include. So someone suggested, you know, could you replicate a study that has previously been done on only males as a PhD study? So it's kind of reducing some of the time frame around like the design of it and so on. I thought that was quite clever, but also just changing, and I know that it's not just one person who can do this, but almost changing the mindset of, you know, if you do 1 study or if you do 2 studies, that's not enough for a PhD. But actually, when you're including a different population that requires so much more complex measures in such a longer time frame, that doesn't make it any less quality. It's just different. So I think changing, you know, that is important, but also even in terms of sports science degrees, getting females to actually engage in our you know, labs, because if women aren't participating even, you know, and they like sports science, I'm assuming if they're doing a sports science degree, well then I don't know how we can get them to participate potentially in future studies.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. We've got a big question there as well, saying, do you also feel because most uni courses don't touch much on female physiology or women in the lifespan, could that also contribute to people wanting to research it? So if we don't know about it, how do we know it's a thing? So yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I'm just trying to think back to like we didn't have any, I didn't have any female specific physiology, but I think there's a problem, isn't it? Because it's like it was female or it was male only physiology, but it's not like that is the norm.
Yeah,
like,
yeah, no, I know for myself on undergrad, and it wasn't until masters we had on undergraduate was under special populations, where it was like female athlete and it was like special population. But and then at masters we actually had a full sort of like 1 seminar on it. But again, I think it's just kind of something that should be like included in the whole just general. It's, you know, it's not sports science for men, it's for everyone.
I think especially with after a sports science degree, I think particularly at undergraduate level, you know, there's a high chance that you're not going to be working with elite athletes, and so you're going to be working with probably some sort of general public. So yeah, I don't know why there's not more emphasis on females, but yeah.
Yeah, sorry, just reading that. That's how it was in Australia. Not sure, but yeah, it's the same.
Yeah.
Same.
So I've just seen that last point by Becky there. Yeah.
Yeah. And then let me just read this one. So uni lecturer completely changed my course at year 2 level. Everything now has male versus female in terms of injury biomechanics, changing their perspectives completely also makes them angry that the status quo is what it is, so they get more engaged. Only a few student complaints that they signed up to do biomechanics, not female studies, so that's not too bad. Yeah, no, that sounds great, amazing. Let me just double check that there's nothing else come in on Facebook. If you've got any more questions for Emma, then just pop them in the chat. I'm just going to double check I've got not upsetting anyone on Facebook. Otherwise, I think we're all good. Yeah, so that's all the questions answered, and a massive thank you to Emma for her presentation and for allowing everyone to ask lots of questions as well. Big thank you to everyone who joined us, whether it was on Zoom or live on Facebook. It's been great, and I hope you all enjoyed and got some takeaways from it as well. This session has been recorded and will be available to view in the next couple of days on YouTube, to anyone who's missed it, or if you'd just like to watch it again. And you can also find all of our other previous meetings on there as well. Finally, the next meeting will be on November the 15th, again at 7:30 p.m. And this time we'll be joined by Brian Holtzman, all the way from America. And he's going to be presenting on some of his latest work titled Recommendations and Nutritional Considerations for Female Athletes' Health and Performance. So watch out for further updates on that coming soon. But apart from that, that's all from me, and we'll see you all again next time.
Thank you so much. And I should say that the paper is free this month as
Yeah,
well.
it is,
So
yeah.
if anyone does want to have a look at it, it's available now to get the full access for free. So yeah, thank you so much, Kelly, for having me. I really appreciate it.
Just let everyone drop off there and then